I am so excited to be welcoming Joshua Leifer and his wife, Shaindy, to be talking about your new book, Tablet Shattered, The End of American Jewish Century and the Future of Jewish Life, which is a book that I found so fascinating that spoke in many ways about how post-October 7th we're processing pre-October 7th trauma about where is the future of American Jewry. But before we get into all of this, I really want to begin by, number one, thank you so much for joining. It means a great deal.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
And strangely enough, a lot of viewers are like, what's Shaindy doing here? Like, why? Like, why did I think
I also was wondering that question.
Why did I think it was so important? And I did, because it was my suggestion.
It was.
That you were crazy enough to say, okay.
I was crazy enough to say, okay.
Yeah.
I said, I hope you talk to me after we agreed to do this.
But your story is really a story about American Jewry's encounter with tradition and tradition's encounter with American culture. And your relationship in many ways is you guys coming from opposite directions and meeting and trying to figure out what's the future of all this? Where are we headed? And I actually want to begin, if you'll allow, with Shaindy's story, because you also have a remarkable story. And tell me, where were you raised?
I was raised in Lakewood, New Jersey.
And when you say Lakewood, New Jersey, you don't mean like the modern Orthodox
No.
enclave?
I mean, I think the modern Orthodox enclave is like after the time that I was raised. I was born in 1994. I'm 30, and there was no modern Orthodox enclave in Lakewood, New Jersey when I was growing up. I don't know if there's a modern Orthodox enclave today, but there's definitely more of a modern crowd. But no, I grew up in the regular, very, very Yeshivish. I went to B'nos Yaakov and Beis Kela. I was a regular Lakewood girl. Meant to, do the regular Lakewood thing. If had I been following the rules, I'd probably have like 5 kids by now and be living there. So.
Exactly. Now, you didn't obviously follow the rules in multiple senses, meaning you're not living in Lakewood now, and you wouldn't describe your lifestyle as Lakewood. When was the first time that you realized that your future did not lie within the community where you were living?
It's funny you're asking that. I think from like the youngest age, honestly.
Really?
Yeah, I remember, we talked about this, but I have like a memory of asking my mother when I was like probably in like 2nd or 3rd grade, like, what would you rather, your kid pass away or your kid go off the derech? Because at that time in my life, like, there was no such thing. I had like nobody. It was just this thing that sometimes you like see somebody, like a girl in jeans in the pizza shop on Motzei Shabbos, and you like, look away. You're so like, you're curious, but you're humiliated.
Yeah.
And so like I think already then I started to grapple with it. And I think honestly it came from a place of.
What did your mother answer?
She said, like, why ask questions between 2 terrible things?
Oh.
But, I mean, it's obvious. My mother's amazing, and my mother definitely, the answer would definitely be off the derech. But I think at that time, like, she didn't even, like, know where I was
this is from a young age. And by the time you were in high school, if I would have asked your 12th grade self, do you plan on living in this community?
No, absolutely not. I already planned leaving, and I already started doing the things I needed to do, including, like, preparing to go to college. But at the time, I was in 9th grade, and I was, like, my mother raised us to read nonstop. I think
Same.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I think it's such a beautiful thing to give your kids.
What were you reading?
At the time, I was probably reading like mostly radical feminist books.
For real.
For real.
What a mom you have.
McKinnon was like I was like, I think also I related to it. I think like Betty Friedan, The Problem That Has No Name, it was something that I really like was able to sort of put pictures. So like a lot of like, I think the generation of women around me who weren't being raised in Lakewood might have already sort of been distant from like a sort of like critique on domestic like gendered roles. But for me, I was like, why does something feel, everything is so beautiful. And I had a very beautiful childhood, and that's important for me to say, but something, especially as somebody that was like, everyone used to tell me when I was little, I remember my cousin always used to tell me to my mother, like, Manya, it's a chaval that she was born a girl because she has such a good Gemara cup, which, I think it's funny because
and you remember overhearing that?
Yeah, I even remember being proud of that because I was a huge debater. Everyone in class in school. And in class and in school, everybody always was like, here goes Shaindy again. The teacher says something racist, and here I am, like, ranting, like, my anti-racist theories, like, my 5th grade teacher who, like, really just trying to, like, teach her, like,
Chumash
class.
or whatever,
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think, like, I always had that sort of intellectual, like, curiosity. And
an idealism.
And a huge idealism that in it, I think also to a fault, never went away.
So you went to Israel after high school?
No, I first went to college. I was in Stern College.
Okay.
And then I finished my degree there. I studied biology and ethics, and I went to Israel after when I was 21.
Now, at this stage, are you, because when you present yourself, we were talking about this briefly before, you don't come off like with the anger that characterizes some, though certainly not all, people who what is known as OTD, off the derech, people who are raised in a very insular traditional community and they leave for reasons that are wholly understandable, are very often very cynical, very bitter, very hurt, very jaded. Now, you may be all of those things, but I didn't notice it when we first met and conversed. And I'm wondering, what do you attribute the fact that you don't have that?
I think there's two things.
Yeah.
Really two things. And we talk about this a lot. I think first off, my mother and my family is just the most amazing and loving family. I think it's very hard to be jaded and angry when you're surrounded by love and support.
Give me an example of your mother's love, of why it's so like...
I think there's a lot of parents that are like, I need to act like I love my kid even though they're disappointing me. But they don't actually genuinely experience pride and joy, which is, I understand because it's hard when their kid is doing something that they never planned. So when I was, going to law school, living myself in Jerusalem, my mother could have been like, like, I'm going to love you no matter what, which I think a lot of parents do, but not genuinely making me feel like she's so proud and so accepting of every choice I made. And an example I can give, like, I think we were just talking about this, but like, I remember in my first year of law school, I had an exam in Jewish law, which is like a regular
Mishpat
Ivri, which is like a regular general big. It's a big course.
Okay.
And it's a big exam.
Your Hebrew pronunciation is a total flex. I appreciate
no,
it.
that I study. I lived here for many years.
We also
I
speak Hebrew like 40% of the
Yeah.
time together.
No, it's very convenient when you don't have other people in New York. I mean, New York, people understand you anyway, but
It's more riskier than New York.
So you had this Mishpat Ivri exam.
Yeah, and just in terms of the family support, like my brother, who was learning in Brisk at the time,
Brisk.
Rabbi Yoshua, came to my house, to my apartment, which, by the way, just so you understand, like, the mutual respect, I was living with two other girls at the time, and he, being in Brisk and being like a single bachar, had a very strict rule that he told me to let them know before he comes. He doesn't want to make them think anything bad about Haredim, because they obviously weren't Haredi, but he won't talk to them or make eye contact with them. So I remember he would come into my apartment, walk straight to my bedroom, which is where we would study. I had a little porch. We'd study out on the porch. And he came every single day, a week and a half before my exam, from after Mariv until Vasikin.
To study
together.
You're studying for the Mishpat Ivri. You have a brother in Brisk.
We're steiging. We're really steiging.
You're steiging together.
Like, really steiging.
Do you remember
he was impressed, by the way. He said he didn't realize that. Like, in law school, they really teach.
That Chiloni learn real Torah.
Do you remember the first time that you dressed not sneakily, modestly? Meaning,
absolutely.
Was it in front of your mother?
It was.
Or was it in secret?
It wasn't in secret. Nothing I did in my life was ever in secret, which I think is bodes to my mother's acceptance. There was never a feeling of secret. It was ideological. Like, I knew she.
It was never a double life.
Never a double life.
Where you're leaving the house, you have a little plastic bag, the jeans. Okay.
Nothing. Even the things that I don't do in front of her, it's a respect thing. She knows. We talk. We're very close. Like, Josh has had an event for the one that got canceled, actually.
We'll talk about that for sure.
My mother went to the event, and there I was dressed, like, not sneakily because it was like a regular, but when I go to Lakewood, I'll dress sneakily, but it's completely no double life. Zero. I do remember the first time. It's actually funny you're asking me. It was like, I started Stern, where I went to college, and I remember I went and I got a pair of jeans, I think it was H&M. I didn't even know how to, like, try them on. I was so embarrassed. But then I remember putting them on. I remember just running down Fifth Avenue like a movie, like, just stretching, like, jumping up and like stretching my legs and being like, wow, this is like a revolution. Like, this is who knew.
It's a recurring theme on 1840 of me still processing the trauma of the first pair of jeans I bought. No, like
my brothers were talking about this.
I think it's a real thing because you feel like.
And if you didn't grow up in that community where jeans are symbolic, they represent
100%.
something.
They represent a worldview.
I also have like 60 pairs, and my friends all joke around with me and told me my not already friends. Like,
he wears jeans as a religious description of an individual. Is like, we grew up knowing that's a thing.
Oh, absolutely.
So you said the first factor is the acceptance of your family, and it sounds like you were really with your mother, your siblings, and you're a big family and a close unit.
Yeah, I'm one of 13 kids.
And what was the other factor you were going to mention?
And then the other factor, I think, goes back to the idealism that you described, and I think that's my disappointment in the secular world. I think having been reading like Catherine McKinnon, I thought I'm going to go out to the secular world and I'm going to have my like introduction to this world about like justice and equality and like feminism and like human rights, and I was like, so I still really am very idealistic. And then I went out to a world and I was like, oh, so they might not have a problem if you wear jeans, but they like step over homeless people and like treat their parents terribly, and everybody is just like setting boundaries all day long instead of like being good humans. And I think that that, I think, like in terms of the anger, I think if you would have met me at 18, I was much angrier because I felt.
Because you were romanticizing the secular
exactly.
world,
So I
that
felt
if
slighted.
only I was there,
Exactly.
then it would solve our problems.
100%.
And then when you immerse yourself, you realize that like people are people. and they're-
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
like
And the more I realized that, even more than people are people, I started to see a lot of the beauty that I took very much for granted, which is something I don't always understand about
the beauty of the
Orthodox.
Lakewood community.
Of the Lakewood community and of any community that has like a genuine obligation towards their community members. That of course sometimes things happen that are terrible and are in violation of those obligations, and we should
Sure.
try and fix that. And like I talk a lot about that.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, there is still a feeling
fabric
of like
of-
midos,
Yeah.
being a good person, like the constant wrestling with it. I did the wrong thing. Should I send them an apology? I don't want to generalize, but
We still talk about Lashon Hara, like
Exactly.
negative speech.
No, we talk about this all the time. Where like there isn't a discourse of midos really outside of the frum world or I mean,
It's interesting.
people-
I do take that for granted.
People talk about like when I don't know. We don't have kids in school, or we don't
Yeah.
have kids at all. So I don't know what it would be like if we were to send our kids
Yeah.
to whatever, to like a regular secular school. I went to a conservative day school as a kid, but then switched into public school.
Yeah.
It's not like character formation was like not a discourse, to use it academically, that I grew up with. And so spending more time in the frum world where like midos is something that are things that people practice every single day. It's very, very different.
One of our earliest interviews was with Shulam Dean, who wrote one of the best, but an OTD memoir. And we were once, it wasn't on the interview, we were once in LA in a yeshiva called Shalhevet, where he was presenting to a writing class about his experience. And one of the things that really struck me was he was telling the kids that when you think of like Jewish values, you always list things that are basically like American values, like education, like, like being independent and setting up. So these are all American values. You want to know what Jewish values are? Like, teach them the laws of Lashon Hara. That was the example he gave.
100%. I couldn't agree more with that. And I think on our first date, I remember I like dated, before I met Josh, I dated like way too many people. Like, and I at this point I didn't even like register. And I remember we were on our date and we started talking about Gashmias. And when like Josh started
Materialism.
Right. And Josh, like, despite having not grown up in the same world that I grew up in, was like, we were just talking about how terrible it is and how careful you have to be and how easy it is to fall into getting obsessed with stupid things that don't make your life better, that don't make the lives of the people around you better, that do nothing for you really, that are just like this endless pursuit of yourself. And like, that is a conversation that is missing for me at least in like the secular world. There's very little discussion. Even when they do it, it's almost always like a purely in an individualist sense. Like, it makes me feel fulfilled. Not like, how does my family feel? How does my community feel? How can I make the people around me feel better? Like, I think that attitude, like my mother's like that, and she taught that to like all of us, of like, we
Be the kind of person that when people are around you, you are value add in positivity.
100%. How can I make that person's day better?
That's a perfect transition because I want to bring in Joshua.
Yeah, Josh.
Josh, your book, and it's so wild how your journey, and your book is kind of like in the middle of the journey. You're coming from the opposite direction. While your wife was raised in Lakewood, very traditional, very knowledgeable. I mean, you know who Rav Yoshua is, so that's definitely. And you.
I was supposed to marry someone who went there, but
and when I asked you which bris, you said Rav, and you said not Rav David's.
Yeah.
So you.
I just want to say to my brother, if he hears this, that he's also great. The one who went to Rav David.
The one who Rav David. We love him.
We
too.
love him too.
No question. But Josh, you kind of came from the opposite end, and tell me a little bit, because you're almost the more typical American Jewish dream, where we're gonna
I agree.
fully, like, when you think of like American Jewry,
Yeah.
tell me about your upbringing. Where were you raised, and what was the religious tenor of your home?
Yeah, I mean, that's a complicated question, and I'll explain why. So I grew up in Bergen County. I grew up in a small town called Wyckoff, which is
Bergen County sounds like
which everyone knows.
Yeah,
and is actually like a 15-minute drive from Teaneck. And in a lot of ways, my parents socially would have probably, I'm sorry if they hear this, but would have probably been happier there. They know that actually, and that's where a lot of their friends are. But for whatever reason, they ended up being kind of peripheral.
Okay.
And they sent me to a conservative Jewish day school.
like a Solomon Schechter?
Yeah, to a Solomon Schechter,
Sure.
which actually closed recently.
Okay. A lot of them, unfortunately,
Right, which is, gives you a sense. And so I, grew up with a very strong sense of a certain kind of Yiddishkeit, very Israel oriented.
Did you grow up with Shabbos?
I joke that I grew up Zocher Shabbos, but not Shomer Shabbos.
Exactly.
It's
Like, today is Shabbos, but you're not really.
We had a meal, we had Kiddush, but then
You could watch TV
Exactly.
and do just Little League or golf.
Exactly. Wake up in the morning, like we might actually go to. A lot of times we might go to shul, and then like I'll have would have a sports practice, in the afternoon.
Gotcha.
And it was kind of this. In that way, it's like it's different. It's a very certain type of American Jewishness.
Sure,
it's
upper class.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, you asked what was the religious upbringing of my life. I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this. The answer is Ivy League.
Yeah,
Ivy League. Like
that's a real thing.
The way that you fulfill yourself is by
matriculating into that
Exactly.
world. The Harvards, the Columbias. I mean, that's not a foreign thing.
Yeah.
Whether in the modern Orthodox community, the non-Orthodox
Right.
community, there was a sense of like, what does it mean to succeed? Get your kid into Harvard, and on the road there, have a basic Jewish literacy.
Exactly.
Can you read Hebrew?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fluent Hebrew speaker.
And writer.
Yeah.
Is that from your upbringing? Or?
That's from, the school was bilingual Hebrew English.
So what's interesting about you is, so you grow up in this kind of like, it's not quite Woody Allen Judaism. That's like even a step away.
Yeah, it's a step away.
But traditional American, what we like the conservative movement, that middle ground.
Exactly.
Where
we have also like the best mix of things. We have from that perspective, like we had Shabbos, we have tradition, but we're also not cut off.
Exactly.
We're not isolated.
Exactly. You knew did you like Purim, Shavuos?
Yeah, we celebrated all the
you knew all the
Chagim. Yeah.
All the Chagim, fast days, Tisha B'Av.
Not Tisha B'Av generally, but Yom Kippur.
That's interesting. You didn't grow up with Tisha B'Av?
I think it's because it's the summer, and I feel like your parents like kind of like gave the school the religious
The important part
education.
about my upbringing, which is why I'm a little not representative, is that the school was responsible for religious education for me.
That's true also, unfortunately.
And the home had a lot of historical
kosher home?
Kosher style.
Kosher style.
What's kosher?
Hebrew National.
Oh, okay.
That's
Kosher,
actually kosher.
exactly.
Okay. I appreciate it. That's the world that my grandparents grew up in, and they were
really?
a part of. Yeah, totally.
So your parents are Rabbi Tshuva?
They're both from small town Jewry. My mother's father was a rabbi, but in Portland, Maine.
Oh, wow.
In the 40s and 50s.
Oh, wow.
But my father grew up in the Berkshires in North Adams, Massachusetts.
Wow.
Kosher home. Like my bubby was very careful on kosher, but like less Shabbos than what you grew up in. I mean, my Zadie worked on Shabbos like everybody else. Like to be fully Shomer Shabbos
Right.
was, at least where my father was growing up, and also where my mother was unheard of. My mother was Shomer Shabbos because her father was the rabbi. So what's interesting about you is the role of Israel played a big role in your formative early
Absolutely.
years. Very Zionistic, I assume.
Extremely Zionistic education. I mean,
Yeah.
the way that I describe this kind of conservative Judaism is like, because I often am translating also with my kind of upbringing to Israelis, and sometimes they'll say like, "Oh, so you were kind of like this is kind of like Datim Leumim." I'm like, "Well, no, because we weren't really halachically."
Yeah, more like Masorati.
Yeah, exactly. But Israel is the linchpin, and Hebrew is the linchpin. So like I grew up, I say this a lot. Like, the way we grew up was you get into school, you say Pledge of Allegiance, you sing a tikva, and then you daven shacharit. But it's all within the connecting to Israel. All the teachers are Israeli. They're all basically veterans of some kind of the IDF, and in all of Jewish observance is basically refracted through the lens of Israel. And so my sister was bat mitzvahed at the kotel, like on the egalitarian side.
Sure.
And that was that was part of our.
And when you saw other Jews, when you would visit Israel growing up, what did you think of people who were living in your wife's community, in Shaindy's community, Lakewood? Did you know about?
I had never been to Lakewood, but it was never foreign to me because my dad's sister is Haredi, and I grew up with fairly close Haredi cousins.
You mean
American?
So American
Shiva.
Yeshivish.
Yeah, but she.
Would they eat in your home?
On paper plates.
On paper plates, yeah. That's what,
I mean,
us and our uncle.
My own
we
friends
bring paper
from
plates.
school had to eat in my home on paper plates.
Oh, gotcha.
Because the school level of ambient observance was
A
notch
higher.
normative. It was like now it would be conservadox. Like I have classmates from that school who went and got smicha YCT and things like that.
Gotcha.
Like, and that's not weird. Like at all.
Sure. And you're growing up in a world where I assume you didn't. Did you grow up in like an anti-Zionist home or just like a non-Zionist?
No, just like a non-Zionist home. And I think in a lot of ways, like certainly not anti-Zionist, certainly not Zionist, but obviously like, I read every single page of the Aten Hamodia every single week. And if you do that, then obviously you're still getting a very right-wing politic about Israel.
Yes,
It's just,
which is interesting.
I think it's very interesting.
It's
I
a
think people
non-Zionist but very right-wing.
Exactly.
Like if we're going to do Israel, let's do it like all the way.
100%.
Interesting. The Yatet. I love the Yatet. We got that in my house too.
You should know, I still read it when I go home.
The Gedolim pictures in the middle was always
the reader's right. Although,
the readers are. Those letters are crazy.
Those letters are crazy. Someone should do something with them. They're hilarious.
They're hilarious. They're the best. Someone needs to write a PhD on the letters to the editor section, the Yated Naman.
The Chinuch round table.
So take me. Let's jump ahead.
Sure.
Take me to when you two meet and where each of you are now, because you veered away from the Zionist doctrine that you were raised with, where you were raised with a Zionism even stronger than I'm sure what I was raised with, because it was like at the very heart
That's all
of your
there
Judaism.
was, in a way.
So at what point did you begin to question that story? Which is like, it's very like that for somebody growing up in the conservative, committed world, that is like the ultimate heresy.
It is the ultimate heresy. In some ways, like, yeah, sometimes I joke, like, what would have been harder if I had, I don't know, like, flipped out fully?
Exactly. If you became Haredi or a secular anti-Zionist,
exactly.
Like that model.
Yeah, and I think I don't know. It's hard to say what would have been
real
harder.
question. That's a real question for a lot of, and I think people are grappling with that right now.
Right.
Because they're. But tell me, when was the first time when you met? Were you already broken away from that story that you were raised with?
Very.
So when did that take place?
I mean, it was a gradual process. I mean, the first time I remember being really out of sync with the community that I grew up in was around 2008, 2009. During
is that the disengagement?
No, that's Cast. It's Operation Cast Lead.
Okay.
During the disengagement I was kind of confused, and in some sense was like, I don't really know.
Yeah.
I don't.
Disengagement was 2004. Five. Yeah.
And that was really the first time that I was exposed to images of the results of Israeli violence and during the war in Gaza, and seeing houses destroyed and crying children and like just a huge scale of human suffering, and then turned around and didn't really find anyone who
addressing it
or willing to talk about it. I mean, one of the things we bond about is I also was a kid who was reading all the time and reading. These were the early years of the internet. And so I was reading like Israeli anarchist blogs, and I tapped into this current of a critical discourse about Israel that just had no manifestation in the community that I lived in.
For sure, in the mainstream, they're not critiquing that way. So when you meet, you're already like what you would how would you describe yourself when you two met?
I think I was very.
Did you kind of like literally meet in the middle? Because
No, I think she was to my left when we met.
Yeah, I think
honestly.
so. I think anyone, this might be controversial to say, but I think anybody that like lives in Israel for many years and understands like the legal system that Israel has currently like ruling over the Palestinians will probably lose their mind. Like that's where I was. I think like, as I've gotten older, you
also have the confidence to question in different ways than Americans do.
100%.
Because you don't feel that your questions or doubt or like, what is this, is actually an affront to your Jewishness or your Israeliness.
100%. I think that has been. I only lived here for a year and a half. I came back because my brother was diagnosed with cancer. Baruch Hashem, he's doing very well, and we're moving back. I think like for me being here in the United States, as a Jewish Israeli leftist, is extremely difficult, because I don't want to use my leftism to like advocate for people who like want to like literally dismantle the state of Israel and commit war crimes against Israelis. I want to end the war crimes being committed against Palestinians, and here there's very little discourse about that. But when Josh met me, I mean, I was super active in organizing. I'm a lawyer.
You were really
Shaindy
involved.
was a hardcore activist.
Much
hardcore than I was.
I was really involved. I spent a huge.
You were a real Smoli. That's
Smolanit, Bogedet.
The whole thing.
Mod.
The whole thing. And you were writing at a point for Jewish Currents. Were you already writing for them at that point?
I was one of the early full-time staffers, but by then I had left to start a PhD. and at the time was a contributing editor. I mean, there are a few steps that I want to sketch out just because I
Okay,
think they are
please.
important,
Yeah.
because I know it might be confusing for listeners, which is that basically because I was confused but also only had a Jewishness that was related to Israel, I was in this kind of bind where I couldn't let go of it because then I wouldn't really have very much. And so I kind of kept diving further into head-on confrontation. So when I was in high school, I had a teacher, a rabbi, who said to me, you should take a gap year after high school. And I said, okay, I'd love to go to Israel. He said, you have three options. You could go to Ein Prat, which is probably the best fit for you religiously, communally, where you're at right now. The problem is it's in the occupied West Bank. You could go to Ma'ale Gilboa, which is where a lot of people who I am friends with and know went, but it's going to be a notch up in terms of
Your practice,
your
study,
practice,
yeah.
your studying. Like, I had enough of a Jewish education to, I've learned some Mishnah, but wasn't like I
like
was.
a full
It was-
morning Seder
yeah,
studying
was
Gemara
was gonna not
was a reach.
Was going to be a reach, and
Yeah.
and I was like, okay, I could. And then he said, okay, so there's a third option, which is this place called Bina, which calls itself HaYeshiva Chilonit, the secular yeshiva in Israel, and it's going to be the most Israeli version.
Gotcha.
Because these are going to be Israeli teenagers exactly your age who are coming from secular houses who want to learn about Zionism, about Judaism, but they're not religious, mainly.
Correct.
And you're going to be the most religious person just by virtue of being a conservative Jew who's once Shabbos,
Sure.
who grew up with some
Shabbos
kind of Shabbos.
and Yontif and the
exactly,
whole thing. Yeah.
Exactly. I probably should have gone to Ma'ale Gilboa because I would have been
What did you
easier-
choose?
I chose Bina.
Interesting.
And I spent a year there.
Do they learn Gemara there?
Yes, they do, but in a
very
mixed,
different way.
very mixed. I mean, very different, mixed. Obviously, men and women.
Sure.
And I mean, the claim of the place was that Bina's pre-military program, which the chutznikim were appended to, were learning a curriculum that was fully recognized as equivalent to what yeshivot hesder were learning. I don't actually know if that's true, but that
Gotcha.
was the spirit of
Gotcha.
of the place. What we're doing is, we're learning Gemara, we're learning Machshavet Yisrael, we're learning all these things.
Jewish thought.
Jewish
yeah.
thought. We're learning these things so that actually, when you get drafted, these are the Israelis, you can serve as an ideological counter to people coming from the Mechina and Eli and the settlement Mechinot.
The more right-wing
right-wing
politically, that you
politically.
have some real substantive knowledge.
Exactly.
Which a lot of times, it's so interesting you raise that, because particularly in America, the knowledge basis between the communities, and I mean by Orthodox and non-Orthodox, is so skewed right now.
Yes.
Where a lot of these conversations, even if it's not so well formulated, even if you don't agree, the level of just basic Jewish literacy in the Orthodox community versus the non-Orthodox community, I'm talking obviously generalized.
Right.
It's different. It's universes apart, which affects your ability to have discourse.
I mean, one of the saving graces for me, and I think the reason how I ended up ending up where I was that because I had such a strong Hebrew education and then did the year at the Mechina and my Hebrew got, fluent, and then there wasn't a barrier anymore I can open up any sefer and
Exactly.
kind of read it.
So when you two meet, you're in your Chiloni yeshiva, which I literally...
No. We met way after.
We met
This
5
is-
years after.
5 years after. Okay,
Yeah.
you're
So that
still...
was before I went
That
to
was
college.
before college.
I went to college.
Yeah.
And then after college, I went back to Israel and worked at a publication called 972.
Or
Okay.
Sicha Mekomit,
Right,
Sure.
yeah.
the Hebrew
And
word.
then I stayed there for a year and then went back to Brooklyn and worked and started my Brooklyn, journalism life. And we met.
And you were like a Brooklyn left wing hipster kind of guy.
Yeah, totally. I remember.
I
I actually canceled our date before we went on our first date because I was like, ugh.
Not like it's
to
too
Brooklyn,
much. It's
yeah.
too much.
Like he's doing his PhD at Yale and he lives in Brooklyn. This is
felt
never
like
gonna
he's
work.
gonna be
Like,
such a
Impossible.
stereotype.
Absolutely.
Gonna be
Yeah.
insufferable.
I'll just
yeah,
start
he'd
talking
be
and
literally insufferable.
Literally, that's actually what I thought. But then he really surprised
Can I
me.
say this? There's a you said
Oh, I remember.
before we met.
after
it was
we-
after we met. You
I said I told him, I texted my friend that I actually liked him, and I'm shocked. And I wrote, even though he lives in Brooklyn and goes to Yale, with a vomit emoji.
Yeah.
and so we met. Yeah, we met after.
What did you do your PhD in?
I'm still doing it in history. The dissertation will probably be about this is how I present it: the global transformation of Jewish politics during the Cold War.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about, you are coming from very different worlds and very different experiences, and both of you are seeing like the limitations of the worlds that you each come from. You see, you loved your upbringing, you love your family, but you also understand that a vision of Lakewood that could encompass all of Jewry is a little difficult.
And I'm not Lakewood at all myself.
Yeah, correct.
Zero. Yeah, 100%.
Correct. And you, on the other side, are dealing with your own disappointments of the typical American Jewish story,
Exactly.
Mainstream, a federation that would make a federation proud.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. All my mom's friends who are involved in their
So when you
federations.
meet, I don't literally need the story of your meetup, but when you first start imagining together what your life together is going to be, what year is it on the calendar, and what are you imagining?
It's not that long. We met a little bit more than 2.5 years.
It's
So
2022.
2022.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's post major COVID.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's like the after effects where it's like
Yeah.
much more political.
Like
at
the
this
woke
point.
people are still wearing masks. I
Yeah.
guess the woke people are still wearing masks, but
Yeah.
even
But
then
yeah,
more. But
there are
it's
people-
kind of over.
Okay, and it's just post COVID.
Yeah.
And where are you imagining your lives right now? When you first
I mean, there are two things that happen, and we meet, and the first thing I think that I thought, maybe you also thought, but I won't speak for you, is I never thought I would find someone Jewish with these politics in the way, who feels politically the way I feel. And the second was, I think we broached this one of our early dates, I had missed the communal aspect of Jewish observance, because for me, the Israel politics was something I couldn't get over. And I basically was like, I'm not going to go to shuls where people are really pro-Israel, because it's too hard. I can't daven with people who I disagree with that much. And I also had, as a single guy, even though I had a lot of friends who would invite me over for, Shabbos meals, there's nothing more lonely than like the walk home after.
Oh yeah.
There's nothing worse than that. And so at a certain point, I was like,
it's
this
the
is
Jewish walk of shame.
It really is a
You
Jewish
walk
walk
home
of shame.
alone from the
Yeah.
meal. You go to your
You're like reckoning all your life.
Yeah,
your
like,
dark
how did
apartment.
we arrive here?
Yeah.
And there's nothing sadder than that. And so at a certain point, I said, okay, I would love all of this, but I don't see a way that it's going to
reconcile Jewish life with your Israeli politics, because you were
Exactly.
fairly left wing.
Yeah.
American left wing.
Yeah.
You would describe it
American
more.
left wing, although I think because of
I think you were always much more Israeli left wing, which is why we got along.
Yeah,
Just
I mean,
in your attitude.
my most important political educations happened both during the year that I was at the Mechina and then also when I worked at 972. And so I've always had one foot in the world of the Israeli left and felt very comfortable and know a lot of those people.
I'm curious to hear from both of you. Just pause for a second. Is there a way that you could describe the primary difference between Israeli left wing versus American anti-Zionism?
Yeah, I think I could. I mean, I think that Israeli left wing is, especially, and I'm talking about the radical left, which is what I still identify as part of, is really committed to ending what I would even call like the apartheid legal regime that exists in like the occupied West Bank and Gaza.
Okay.
And I think the American has, as I've experienced the American left wing, is kind of committed to maybe ending the state of Israel, or at least that's what they say. And I don't know. I think there's the argument that people make that I don't buy, but that, this is kind of the rhetoric you need to adopt, and we'll worry about it in order to end the. But I think that's like the biggest difference. Is I think one of them is genuinely trying to like change the current situation, and the other one I think is trying to reverse the current situation.
Interesting. Change versus reverse. That's
I think
well put.
I think that's. I mean, it's a given in Israel for Israeli leftists, for the majority of them, even on the radical left, that Israeli Jews aren't going to leave, and that's not a given, at least discursively, in the U.S. left.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I wanna move ahead. There's so much.
But I wanted to say one thing
Please.
also that's different. It's like, having spent many years in Israel and many years doing activism and organizing, and also my legal job, I worked for like Leat Semel, who's like a really famous attorney who defends Palestinians accused of security violations, et cetera, et cetera. It's just your politics come from a very different place. Because I think that a lot of Jews, a lot of Israelis included in this, sort of are raised to believe that there are these Arabs and these Arabs do terrible things, and it's kind of like the only reason why is anti-Semitism. All of a sudden you discover that there are millions of people who like are living on with the threat of like home demolitions, are actually having their home demolished, and that everybody has like family that's in prison that never had like a court case that like
Okay.
never, yeah, that you discover endless violations. As a lawyer, you discover that in law school you learn two different systems of law, one that applies to like Israeli citizens and one that applies to Palestinians, and you start to discover like layer upon layer upon layer of oppression, and your leftism is born from just like a very basic kishka's like desire for equality. I think it's different in America because I think that in general the place that Israel-Palestine has in America is very often like part of a more like a less real, more, I don't know what the word
It's
is.
Less pragmatic.
It's an
much
abstraction.
more,
You
and a lot
can
of
be
virtue
extreme
signaling.
in abstraction. You can
Exactly.
Defund the police.
Exactly,
Black Lives
exactly.
Matter.
Things that don't have
We
practical
sometimes
importance.
use
slogans
statements
can become all-encompassing and also
Exactly.
litmus tests when they're a little bit detached from
the pragmatic
from
reality of
Exactly.
what we're dealing with. That's
Exactly.
absolutely fascinating. So, where are you Jewishly when you meet? Are you experiencing the same thing? Like,
Yeah, I think we were experiencing, even though we came from very different places, had kind of arrived at this place where it felt like we want to live a Jewish life.
and you had less Judaism than you really wanted inside.
Yeah, always. And I always have a chip. I mean, we joke about this all the time. Always have a chip on my shoulder about having like not learned in a real yeshiva. Like I can, because of Hebrew, I can make it work.
But still,
but it's not.
There's a piece.
There's always going to be this feeling that like I'm missing something.
Okay.
My mother thinks that he's going to end up going to yeshiva. We'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see. She'd like that. But more than like so there's the learning part, but there's also the enveloping Jewish home of Shabbos, of the Chagim.
And what are your are you working on Jewish cards at this point?
When we meet? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a graduate student, kind of freelancing.
Sure, but what are your cohorts like at this point? Like your American left wing cohorts.
I think that
what is their vision for Judaism, which you in some ways heard, shared?
I think there was a lot of ambivalence about
Judaism as a religion.
Itself. I think there was a sense of, well, maybe there isn't really very much living here left if you're not religiously practicing and you don't have Jewish languages, which most people don't, and so it's a kind of cultural artifact almost. It's a relic.
And there's Jewish culture that
there's
everybody
Jewish
likes.
culture that everyone likes. I think like this is a way that I've always been a little bit outside or felt outside of maybe the core of the milieu. One is that I have like a very skeptical view of American popular culture, and so it didn't really speak to me. Like
It never
Bagels
spoke
and Lox
to you.
Judaism never spoke to
Seinfeld
me.
Judaism.
I've never seen an episode of Seinfeld in my life.
Oh my God, for real?
For real.
One of the most fun things about us
We
is
don't watch
Josh
TV
has
with
like a strict no TV rule. Sometimes I get him to compromise, but we really don't watch
Maybe
TV.
Israeli news sometimes.
No, we watch Israeli news
Yeah.
every once in a while.
Yeah.
And sometimes
And he
we watch-
converted you to this religion as well?
I mean, I
There's no
never was
TV.
like growing up reading. I never
Oh.
like fully got the TV bug, but I watched more TV than I do today.
I grew up in a home without a TV, and it was like closely monitored, and it fully backfired on my parents.
really?
Oh, did it?
Where I'm like, there's nothing that helps me unwind, and like nothing in the world.
I have
a massa-
siblings like you.
my ideal massage is nobody touching me. I'm just in a room alone, just glued to some screen.
That was our Chol like literally our Chol Hamoed trip. Sometimes we're just going to a hotel and just watching TV. My mother with the remote making sure that it was like Discovery Channel,
Yeah.
History Channel, something clean. But that was like
Because
we didn't want anything else.
Such a highly regulated item. So I want to go to like really the crux of your book. And when I introduced you and when we were first talking, I was talking about how October 7th surfaced pre-October 7th trauma. And I want to get into some of that, but I want to kind of begin with a very like basic retelling of where are you on October 7th? What is your reaction? Because you're working for Jewish Currents, which is it's anti-Zionist publication. I know personally people who have worked there and who do work there, who write for them. I think I get a subscription to Jewish Currents. They're giving out free subscriptions that you can gift somebody, and just to see, like,
Right.
just to see. I definitely understand why it is not mainstream and why it is like very aside. It's like to the left of J Street, like for sure.
Far.
I mean,
far to
it's
the
a
left of
J Street. It was a common object of criticism for me also in my own work.
Correct. So you're working at Jewish Currents now. You're in this relationship where you're trying to figure out like how to cultivate that sense of Jewish identity with all of the baggage and alienation and doubt and questions that you both have. And now it's October 7th, 2023.
Can I just jump in and say that we were already by then, we were fully keeping Shabbos and we were like fully observant.
Orthopraxis by then.
Yeah.
Really?
It happened in a second. We met each other on the first day. We talked about Gashmias. On the second day, Josh said, I've always wanted to keep Shabbos, but I just like never had someone that I felt like I could do it with.
When did you do that? The second date?
And I was like, me too. I was like, that was a big difference between me and the other Orthodox people. I was just like, I love this, but I just have no one around me that I can be doing this
do it with.
Right.
And on like your own terms.
Exactly.
But like for real.
But
like,
for real, exactly.
Let's keep like.
And not like not fake Shabbos.
No, we
fake
keep Shabbos like our phones off, everything's off, like completely.
It's inconvenient. Meaning, I always say,
exactly.
If you only want Shabbos when it's convenient, you'll never have Shabbos.
100%.
Yeah.
And the inconvenience of Shabbos is what makes it so
beautiful.
special. The rush, the Friday, the pressure.
Yes.
I'm going to get this all done. Blah, blah, blah.
Exactly.
And then when it's serene and I'm in this bubble of time.
Yeah,
this
the palace and the Heschel's palace.
Exactly.
And time.
Like you really feel it, but you need that Friday.
Man,
You know, like if you could I'll just throw it in the microwave later. Like the vibe is good.
No, yeah, of course.
It's not there. Now, at this point, I'm just curious of Shabbos before we get to October 7th. Your Jewish life, I mean, you describe yourself as orthoprax, which even that distinction doesn't hold a lot of water for me.
Right.
Because I think a lot of Jews like it's ortho. I don't know what any Jews believe.
Right.
But meaning you came to Judaism not because of some careful examination from the sources
From first principles.
of what is the commandment that Shabbos needs to be, but it was the whole of wanting the experience of Shabbos in your life. Is that correct?
I mean, it was part of a broader worldview, like gradual shift that we also talked about and did together of like actually thinking, in this sense, maybe it is a little bit more first principles of thinking in this way. The axiom of a halachic life is commandedness. And that's a very different axiom from the liberal life that I felt was like making me unhappy. And that was the source of the things that I was actually missing. And so Shabbos came as part of real Shabbos came as part of a broader taking on of a framework of obligation.
Why would a framework of obligation make you happier? Every yeshiva boy has grown up with their rebbe say, you think he's really happy? You
But
think
the rebbe's right.
That's not where we're not. But there is some.
Explain the lack of satisfaction. You're in a Yale PhD. You're coming from I don't need to read your parents' bank statements, but an upper middle class American Jewish family. You have everything going for you. Why introduce a framework of obligation for whatever reason?
I mean, I felt as though the kind of society that I was living in ambiently was one that was lacking a lot of things in terms of people caring for each other, people being there, showing up for each other. Just the idea, because the world that I lived in sanctified choice, anyone could opt out of anything at any time. It's kind of destabilizing.
Yeah.
Or you can say to a friend, like, I wish I could be there for you, but like, I'm just...
I'm busy, or I'm not
I mean, these are things that shocked you when you came into
These things always still shock me. In that way, I'm still a girl from
because
Lakewood.
you grew up in the Lakewood community where, like, somebody has a baby, like the meal train is going to take you months.
Literally, and also even beyond the meal train, in a daily way, on a daily basis, in a way that even like in my activism, everyone would joke around and say like Shaindy's still Haredi. She's Haredi about like justice now.
Yeah.
Like I like the commitment to like
the Mesiras
sacrifice.
Nefesh.
Mesiras Nefesh, like sacrifice. Remember Moshe Feinstein? Like they slammed the door in his finger, but he didn't want to insult the driver. Like that.
I know that story.
That story was, and when we initially
talked
had
about
some like
that right
communication trouble, because I'm like, I don't understand some things, and she was like, this is a really important story for understanding how I think
When
about.
Moshe Feinstein and they slammed the door in his finger, but he didn't want the driver to feel bad, so he didn't say anything. Moshe.
I don't know if it's true, that story.
Who cares?
Exactly.
His image, when I look at him, there's truth to that story.
Exactly.
Because you see the Feinkeit, like
Exactly.
the real care, the compassion. That's just everything. Every interaction with him is
and you
marked
being
with,
the least important part of your life, not the most important part of your life. I also think that part of this is that I don't want to get too into it to like, with my brother's own life story, but my brother got cancer very quickly after we met. He was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer a week before his wedding. Baruch Hashem, today he's doing great, and he's
Chazdei Hashem.
Chasdei Hashem for real. But I think that even that experience, which was a moment where my family is super close, all of us, the very different people, the less different people, everyone is really, really close. All of a sudden, having an experience that was so jarring for all of us, you remember what actually is
what it means to be a part of a community, because they're activated.
Exactly.
I never seen anything like what I saw when her family rallied around her brother when he was sick. Just never seen anything like it.
And the community that rallied around,
Yeah.
but I think it's also just in a very deep way. I started to realize, like, I felt like, and this is maybe more of a scathing criticism of the left, but I felt like I was, part of a left, and in Israel, I think the left is a way, way more decent left. So I'm talking about again, like this
American,
than the American left. But still, it spoke a lot about solidarity. But like, where did I feel like the solidarity was happening? Where like, somebody was coming, and like my family is extremely like religiously very diverse, and like was coming and like opening the Bikur Cholim house at crazy hours and like giving
That's
us
where you
everything
stay
we
when
need.
someone's in the hospital. There's always a house.
And that was a
Right
very
next to
intense
Memorial Sloan
experience for
Kettering.
us.
I think I remember just feeling like, at the time
Because we stayed there.
Yeah, exactly. I remember I was just thinking, I was working then at the time for an NGO, and I remember thinking like, the people that I work with talk about these ideals, but they wouldn't, and this is
like
there's
actually
no such thing. It's not even up to them. Like there is no world, there's no structure, there's no place for people to be doing this kind of
It's so interesting. When I had one time, Baruch Hashem, thank God, she's totally fine. But when my daughter was an infant, we had to bring her to the hospital. Like she had broke out in a really late fever. It's very scary to bring a little baby to the hospital. And I remember I was keeping it together mostly for my wife, like just like you want to be the strong one, and I broke down crying when I went to the Bikur Cholim kosher room. And I saw just like the bisili and like
everything.
all the kosher food.
They brought us like vegetarian food because I have a lot of vegetarians in my
it's
family.
there's no other word like Mika Amcha Yisrael. Like this is real. Like this, it's for real. It's really translated, which is really, really wild. And for you, when you're experiencing this, again, it's so interesting because you have to be raised in the place where you were raised to realize to de-romanticize, to take away the shine of choice, of opting in, of fashioning your own life.
Exactly.
Because when you grow up in our world, I didn't grow up in Lakewood, but in a strict Orthodox world, I wouldn't call my upbringing insular. My father is an oncologist, so that's literally the world that I was raised in. But you romanticize imagine I could do whatever I want. Every kid, when I was in Wallbaum's or the grocery store, I would pick up the non-kosher gum and go, and just like give it
the gum of all the things.
The gum.
the gum.
I do know the big deal of like
the gum. I would just see non-kosher food, or, Lucky Charms, which is like the great cereal that every young Orthodox child. There were two things that I would think of as like what it meant to like true happiness that I was being prevented from: Lucky Charms and Saturday morning cartoons. There were some shows where like I don't have access to that.
We had no Lucky Charms, but we did have Saturday morning cartoons.
You did have Saturday morning cartoons. But at what point did it start to hit you that this liberal ideal that you're living the dream, where did you feel that sense of dissatisfaction? When did that first hit you?
I mean, as long as I've known myself as a person, but it didn't come from a Jewish or a only Jewish place in the beginning. Part of how I became a leftist was through, or part of how I got to where I am was becoming just like a regular left-wing kind of rebellious kid in the suburbs and being like, this way of life is shallow. The idea that your recreation is going to the mall and
football games.
Exactly.
You're not a sports guy.
Not really. I mean, I followed hockey a little bit. I was a Devils fan during like the time when they were really good.
Yeah, but you're not Sunday. You're not in a fancy football league.
We've never watched sports together. We've never watched a movie together. That's basically.
Yeah.
And so, it wasn't interesting to me. It felt just like,
what are we doing here?
Forced kind of. Like I felt like these were compulsory forms of recreation that I didn't really want to do because I was a little bit of a weird kid.
Look at all these ways of softening the trauma of existence, honestly.
Yeah.
Of like thinking about purpose, thinking about like why am I alive? Why am
Yeah.
I here? It's a lot easier and stabilized. This is why I watch television.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know, watch a football game and like I could root.
Right.
It's over. There's an outcome, and like the dread that I normally feel of being alive, of
Yeah.
sensing my own consciousness,
Right.
of all of that stuff. Like, you know, a 2-hour Martin Scorsese movie just like gives you a breather.
But it's funny because religion also, in a lot of ways, I think is sort of an antidote to the trauma of being alive.
Very much so.
I think it gives you
Yeah.
a channel also for that, like to channel the energy.
Exact-
It's not
what-
a balm, and it's not numbing.
What
It's-
to
Yeah.
do with it?
Yeah.
Like what to do with it? 1,000%.
Yeah.
So let's now move, because you didn't just change or transform religiously, and both of you transformed in different ways, and you kind of found this like really incredible middle, which to me, the reason why your story enchants me so much is it's emblematic of what I think a lot of American Jews are grappling with and struggling with in this very moment. And a lot of that, to come back to, was surfaced post October 7th, meaning I don't think October 7th is what began the trauma for American Jewry, but it is what really brought front and center that we could no longer ignore all of the past traumas of just like figuring out, what is Judaism supposed to mean? What is the vision of this? October 7th happens. You have this fascinating story pre-October 7th that brings you to this moment. You're obviously, there's a lot of trauma, and you're working at Jewish Currents. You end up resigning, or is that
Yeah,
fair?
that's correct.
When and why?
About 2 or 3 weeks after.
Why were you? Tell me about your. Would you call it disappointment, disillusionment? Did your views change? Why are you stepping down? You were a writer. You have this wonderful platform. Why step down?
A few reasons. I mean, October 7th, my immediate reaction, and my first reaction was the one that I had with Shaindy, where it was, are our friends okay? Are people we know okay? And then the second one was a huge amount of guilt, because I was then started to see the kind of secondary discourse,
Which I don't think
about
we
it,
expected.
which we didn't expect. Maybe I was naive, and I didn't expect there
Tell
to
me
be
what that secondary discourse
people
is.
cheering them or saying like, this was good, or what did you expect, or this is what needs to happen. And for me, I was just completely taken aback, because some of those people were also people that I knew personally
from your work.
from my work, just around being a left-wing journalist. And
Did you hear
Yeah.
that from your Israeli?
Obviously not for my Israeli.
I mean, this is
colleagues.
where the difference between.
But like, without getting into too much detail about like my past work, but I had a lot of colleagues that weren't Israeli, and I did absolutely hear from people, including like international law lawyers who like I spent years like, you know, in awe of, or who are my
Human
like
champions of
yeah,
human
who
rights.
or people that I actually knew personally, and also were like role models for me of what kind of human rights lawyer I want to be. Who also even just in terms of like analytically, were like lawyers who I respected the way they thought and their craft, suddenly saying things like, this attack is in compliance with international law, or like not coming out and saying anything negative, that's for sure not. But even if I include the support, huge amount of support coming out of people who I thought of as allies in the United States and Europe.
Allies to what?
Allies to freeing Palestine from the Israeli occupation, which I still support,
Yeah.
and I still think needs to happen if there's going to be any end to all the human rights abuses happening. But I think at the time I was shocked, and I knew multiple people that were killed in the Nova.
You did know people who were.
Yeah,
killed.
not like, and no good friends, but I worked for many years when I was in law school. I also, I don't know, it's an organization.
It's like
on-
the
Yeah.
Israeli
It's like
footsteps. kind of.
yeah, exactly. It's the Israeli footsteps, and I volunteered there for many years, and there were a lot of Charedim Mishavar at this party, and I just remember on
People
my
who
Facebook
used to be
group-
religious.
Yeah, people used to be religious, and
Sure.
a lot of times they're like the ones who like to go party and
Yeah, sure.
rave and that. And I just remember seeing them. I was in the Facebook group with them, and I just remember seeing people starting to upload their names of people who I used to complain about having to do shifts with them, and all of a sudden they're dead.
Wow.
And the simultaneous experience of seeing that, and then seeing people that I really believed cared about human rights, supporting it. It was just, I remember telling Josh, and I still feel this way today, I'll never unsee it. It doesn't mean that I support, obviously I don't support the horrible massacres happening in Gaza now, but I'll never unsee that people who I thought were in the same sort of struggle with us trying to end something actually like I said, are really just trying to reverse things, because if they can see civilians being targeted and killed and pulled and from their homes or at a party being like shot in the head, and their reaction to that this is legitimate, then we're obviously not.
We're not in the same.
We're
It's
not in
funny.
the same.
One of the things we've talked about as we process the event is I say to Shaindy sometimes, like, this is your kind of like Litvish reasoning, where you say we have a rule and we apply it to these circumstances. The rule doesn't change. So if killing civilians is wrong in one circumstance, it's also wrong in this other circumstance. And there's nothing, we're not gonna.
Yeah.
This is what it means to be consistent. This is what it means to hold to a rule. And it turned out that the people who I think you certainly, and I was like a little bit more in this squishy area of like, we have to historicize, we have to understand.
Yeah.
But basically,
at some point, you have to be like, this is
right. This is wrong, and it's not. It's unequivocally wrong.
Yeah.
And the shock, for me, I think, was finding that was not an acceptable thing.
You were genuinely shocked.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I know I know all of the people who have been sending me
emails.
We'll
get there
over the last days.
There. Told you so.
Told you
we'll
so.
Get there.
But I was genuinely shocked because I thought. I mean, one, I thought better of the people who were in this general kind of milieu in terms of their moral integrity, but I also thought just in terms of strategically, like, hadn't we been embarking on this political struggle to change people's minds about?
Did you feel almost a sense of futility in a lot of your work leading up to that point?
I mean, I felt even worse because I mean, Shaindy remembers this well. Like one of the moments where I broke down was like, did I contribute to the dehumanization of Israelis by writing the things that I wrote? And I don't think that there are things that I would phrase differently, but I reported the truth. I didn't write anything that I didn't see or know was true. But I had a huge amount of regret because I felt like...
Because sometimes, again, that's a lot of the difference between Israel and America. When you take the same truth and you tell to Israelis who have that sense of confidence, you know that they're not questioning that. In America, it can metastasize into such a different ideology, which is I'm shocked at what we've seen post October 7th in America. By and large, I've become like kind of numb to it. But the way that the world's story on every Ivy League campus of all the things going on, I'm not minimizing. I understand the critiques that people have on the left, but the fixation on Israel and how this has been center headlines has caught me fairly off guard. Were you surprised by the encampments and the climate on college campuses?
I wasn't surprised by them. I think for me, the thing that was hardest wasn't the fixation on the issue, but it was the way that the discourse jumped from a place where I had kind of gotten used to it, which was where we used words like anti-occupation to mean the occupation of the West Bank and the siege of Gaza, and like kind of the parameters roughly set by international law. And obviously, I also wrote articles about what happens if the two-state solution isn't possible. I mean, I still think that the persistence of the occupation is the greatest existential threat to Israel's survival.
Correct, but when you said occupation, you were talking about the West Bank.
Yeah, I meant the military occupation. I meant it in that
And how did you see the discourse kind of change?
And then the discourse jumped to basically being like, Israel, there's no form of Israel that would be legitimate. There's no form of Jewish self-determination that would be legitimate. And that then became a kind of litmus test in some places of the activist left, where you have to believe that that's the case, and there's a lot of things that happened in our political life that changed. I think it's related to some of like the long 2020, where basically, and in some ways this change was salutary in that prioritizing the experiences of people who are on the front lines of oppression, that makes like intuitive sense. But then something kind of happened where the politics became almost a kind of politics of deference. So there are some Palestinians who say that Jews have to go back. Obviously, there's nowhere we can go back to, or there's no form of Jewish self-determination that's legitimate. And that became the line, basically.
How did this affect your friendships? Like I think you were friends with Peter Beinart.
Yeah, I'm still Peter. I'm still on talking terms. So
but
You guys are still friends?
yes, Peter and I are still friends.
Did you have relationships that fell apart completely?
Of course. A lot of them.
And why? How did they see you? What did you get branded as? Because there's something very sad because you're definitely not Zionist enough for like the mainstream.
That's the irony of everything
and
that's happened.
And you're not sufficiently anti-Zionist for so like you're like on this like teeny tiny little island.
Yeah.
So all the Israeli radical leftists live on that little island.
Yeah, but
yeah, that's the
That's what you have left.
Yeah, those are the people who I'm most in touch with these days. Kind of.
Did that hurt you? That like some of those friendships?
I mean, it hurts, of course, to lose friends. I mean, I think there's a part of me even now that says, well, I understand them. You know, the left is a movement, and people who come out and criticize the movement in public, especially when there was a crackdown on, you know, freedom of expression. There was, you know, police curtailment of people's rights, and that by criticizing the left, I was somehow
empowering the
enemy, like the enemies of the movement. And still today, that's still like the kind of double bind that I'm trying to figure out, which is I feel like the movement is making mistakes, but if I criticize them, then like my words can now also be used by people who I don't share their politics with from the other side, of people on the right who want to say like, see, you know, like even this guy, thinks things have gone too far. And I don't want to be, I mean, but I also think part of what happened over the course of the book also is I came into my own a little bit as a writer, and also through conversations with Shaindy, and began to feel like it's okay to take an independent line here. It's okay, like I have to do what I think is right and say what I think is true. And if that means that people who I think good friends should be able to hold that and still be okay with it. And if they can't, then that's sad, but you know.
Yeah. Well, explain. You know, it's so interesting because a lot of your experience is like the breakdown, how untenable nuances sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's a big underlining part of this.
That you know, on an individual level, I think all of us, without exception, have some nuance take either on our religious life or on our political life or relationship to Israel. Everybody's got a nuance. The issue is you can't build community sometimes on it's very hard. It's very challenging.
Yes.
And therefore, it's much easier to build a community with like simplicity. I don't mean like dumb, but like you get like a slogan.
Yeah.
And some slogans.
Like color war.
Yeah, but some slogans engender one type of community, and other
Right.
slogans engender other types of community. And you got to just like pick the slogan that's going to be the best approximation either of your individual views or that will yield the
Right.
best experience.
I think both of us are dispositionally have a really hard time with that way of thinking and
I
being
agree.
put in that position.
And also, I refuse.
But it's kind of the reality, no?
I don't think so. I mean,
These are the substance of our
If this
argument.
is-
Sounds like, yeah.
No, well, it might be the reality, but I think that each person can try and sort of carve out a space where they say no. Because if, for example, I have to choose transferring all the Palestinians or all the Israelis, and I just it's the same thing. There's millions of people that deserve to live a life of dignity in the land that they were born in. Like I'm just giving you
I'm not even talking
no,
about.
but I mean, because it touches on that, because that's like the kind of like color war, lack of nuance politically. You could also argue that exists religiously as well. Maybe with religion, I feel like more okay with it because it feels like I'm not supporting the like murder of somebody. And so it's like if I want to have a little bit of a less nuanced view of religion in order to be able to participate in a religious community, then I'm not hurting anybody.
So you know, we had this term that we've been using called hashkafically homeless, where
Yeah.
you know, we're trying to address, you know, what 1840 describes. I take the view where I think publicly you can't speak with too much nuance, or you're going to end up being bedfellows with. You're not going to end up being able to build a movement on just like all the itty bitty nuance. And that's why, like, I don't really do detailed politics on Twitter. I don't even know if I have such detailed political stances. I know I have instinctive prayers
Right.
for Jews and for the state of Israel. Like, I do not want to be the generation that loses the state of Israel, even though that it's like that became part of the agenda, so to speak. Like, it was placed on the agenda.
I think what you're saying, though, is also an important shift that happened for me intellectually. I mean, I had a conversation with someone years ago who said to me, like, how do you wake up every morning and contribute to the destruction of the state of Israel? And my reply to them was, I don't think that in the end that my journalism is contributing to the destruction of the state of Israel. I am trying to sound the alarm, actually, about
to help preserve its character,
to preserve its moral character, and to preserve literally what I think
or
it's
establish its moral character.
And exactly.
Shaindy
She's
chazak. She has that. That's the difference I'm seeing here in the way that we talk.
He's a lot more polite than I am.
Yeah, you have that.
I grew up with like liberal politeness, and Shaindy's shagged and argued it out at the table. And so
you're at like the DNC trying to like
I'm not.
make it work, and you got that Israeli. Good for you.
Where was I? And so
you're talking about not wanting to be a part.
Right, and so, but the thing that happened on October 7th was, and this is more a feeling than it is a reality. Like, at no point did I think, oh, this attack is going to end the state of Israel. But for a moment, I don't think that the war in Gaza is an existential war. I think it's wrong to frame it as one. But in that moment, I had a feeling of something I had not had in all the years that I spent reporting on the occupation.
We might lose this.
Which is like, we are really like a vulnerability. We can be hurt, that Israel isn't invincible. All of my criticisms of Israel, in the background, I realized we're kind of had taken for granted this idea that Israel is so much more powerful than the Palestinians, that there's nothing Palestinians could ever do to actually harm Israel. And that was wrong.
But I still think it's important to say that it doesn't change any of the fact that all the things that Israel does today that violate Palestinian human rights has nothing to do with
it didn't change my moral fundamentals, but it changed my understanding of vulnerability.
Let's move a little bit to kind of how this experience and the viewpoint that you stake out in your book, because even though you have an extraordinarily unique story, especially Shaindy, the way you've come together, but you also have a story that there's a part of it that's very universal. There has been an awakening about Jewish identity right now. Anytime there's anti-Semitism, there's an awakening right now. And a lot of people, you get awakened to anti-Semitism. You see it, the warriors on either side in that color war battle. And the refrain that I've been repeating over and over and over again is that the purpose of Judaism is not to fight anti-Semitism, but we fight anti-Semitism to focus on the purpose of Judaism. And
I can co-sign that.
And it leaves a vacuum that I think American Jews are trying to figure out now. Like, so what's now? What should Jewish life look like? Because to me, and I was very like, what resonated so much is you are pretty fearless in the way that you critique this standard institutional vision of what American Jewish life should be, because in many ways, like, it didn't deliver on its promise, like that sense of like real vibrancy and
right.
We got co-opted by just like the rest of the Ivy League vision, and then we got so offended and felt so betrayed when we realized we were still different, we were still Jewish. And a lot of that betrayal was anchored in the fact that we didn't really have a comfortable idea of like, what's the purpose of Judaism? What is our religion? What is this identity about? So I want you to explain the argument that you make in the book. Why do you call it the end of an American Jewish century?
Sure. I mean, I think I'll just say in terms of the processing trauma comment that you made before that, I mean, I don't know if I would call this a trauma, but part of what happened was that I think the communal infrastructure that was built was kind of built around almost the deferral of the question about meaning. And because those institutions basically don't really have the buy-in that they had at mid-century,
correct,
the questions about meaning have resurfaced.
Like your friends who went to Solomon Schechter, where are most of them now? I'm curious.
Almost.
Are any of them still like committed conservative?
Almost everyone who went to that school is functionally modern Orthodox.
Interesting. They mean they shifted over.
Yeah, there are a few people who I think maybe ended up in Israel, but
if you're in America and you're looking for Jewish community, I mean, Orthodoxy, I don't want to, I don't mean this in an offensive way, but it's kind of the only game in town.
I mean, this was something that I felt even in college, where I got to college and just sociologically had more in common with, I felt like I had more in common with the Orthodox community than I did with other parts of the Jewish community just because there was like a there.
Yeah.
And there were people who were willing to argue also, which I liked.
There was real commitment.
I was
stakes.
I was like an in and out member of the Orthodox
but there were
community.
stakes. There was a real worldview and stakes. So what do you think caused this collapse?
So the argument that Tablet Shatters makes is that what we know of as the American Jewish consensus that emerged in the beginning of the 20th century, but really crystallized in the post-war period, was grounded on 3 pillars, ideological pillars.
Yeah.
One is Americanism.
Sure.
Which I mean a certain kind of American Jewish exceptionalism that America is a exceptionally good nation based on its treatment of Jews. And that starts because America's comparatively...
And we can be anything here. We can be great here. We can get, right?
Exactly.
Professions, wealth, and we really...
The only in America story
Yeah.
becomes actually a kind of religious pillar for a lot of people. I mean, you hear it across the, the observance spectrum of people who are like, only in America could I be this? Could someone who is a shmata dealer and here could become a CEO here? Yeah, whatever.
Shaindy, you did good with it. Yeah. Okay.
And that gets bolstered by America's backing for Israel also. So now America is the guardian of the Jewish people in some sense on the world stage.
Interesting.
The second pillar is Zionism. And I don't mean Zionism in the book, just in the, should Israel exist? Like, that's not what I mean. I mean the idea that I think a lot of
American Jews, part of their religious identity is supporting the state of Israel.
It's not just supporting the state of Israel. It's that, and you see this in people who I have like a pet peeve about this, but you see it in kind of, I think, like ignorant religious statements that say like everything in Judaism was meant to culminate in this state. Like the idea that Israel is the telos of all of Jewish history. Now, like, it happens to be a very important turning point in Jewish history. Is it the telos of where everything was going?
I don't think you want me to answer that
maybe
question
it is.
with my messianic mysticism.
I'll
put that on hold.
We can argue about Rav Kook another time.
Yeah.
And, that's maybe not the part of that. But whatever. So I don't think most Americans have never read.
Correct.
Jews have never read Rav Kook. It's not about like, are you a cookie?
Most Americans probably don't know who
Rav Kook is.
Forget about that.
Yeah.
They don't know the history that led to this point.
Right.
Yeah.
We're very cut off. American Jews from the they know Maimonides because he has a hospital named after him.
Literally.
But like the textual learning, most American Jews, do you think that they know the 6 orders of the Mishnah?
Definitely not.
Do they know the 4? I mean, I'm not testing it in a minute. The 4 sections of Shulchan Aruch. Like,
definitely not.
Do they know what Lag BaOmer is? A lot.
Probably
Forget
not.
Lag BaOmer. They don't like. I've learned from Josh and his some of his friends in society. Like they don't know anything.
Yeah.
Like the funny thing is that I so often feel like, as like someone who grew up Haredi, like there's so much like judgment when people tell me, and now this is like maybe I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but like a lot of Jews who didn't grow up religious being like, you guys think you're the real Jews, but then I talk to them and I'm like, we kind of are.
Well, that's what I was talking about earlier. No,
I don't mean. I want to be clear. I don't mean real Jews. I mean just in terms of it being familiar with Judaism.
I know exactly what you mean. There's this book by Samuel Friedman that I love called Jew vs. Jew. And at the very end in the epilogue, he quotes from, I think his name is Rabbi Aronson, who was a Reform rabbi who was in Beechwood, Ohio, after this big Erev debate. And the Reform rabbi gets up to his congregants and says, look, the animus, they got into a big fight with the Orthodox community. The animus that we've taken, I'm not justifying it, but you have to realize the people who are arguing with you know so much more about the religion they are defending than you do. You are, by and large, he says it black and white, ignorant Jews. You don't know anything. And I think a part of that is it wasn't a pillar to be educated Jewishly. There was no sense of pride of like having a grasp on even the basics of Jewish history, like the very basics. And I don't know why, right? So your first pillar was
Americanism. The second is Zionism, and Israel just becomes and the third was liberalism. And I didn't mean liberalism in the political sense. I meant liberalism in a liberal approach to religion, as I see it, which is individualist, voluntarist, and relativist.
Yes.
And basically individualist in the sense that the main religious question of liberal Judaism starts from the me.
Yes.
And it's, what does it do for me?
Yeah.
And then the me says, well, I choose to do this, I choose to do that. Why? I have some reasons. I like it, I don't like it. Like, there isn't any kind of system, basically, for why I would do some things or the other. And the third part of the relativism is I can't really tell you why.
What to do, or
why you can do that and I can do this, and I respect you, and I don't really know. I can't really give reasons for.
And why do you think that collapsed so deeply? You know, I have my own theories, but I think that collapse, which I don't think is because now we can tell people what to do, but I think a lot of the experience of what that life that is purely predicated on chosen love, chosen identity, chosen everything, it can be deeply disappointing. Like, you don't feel your life is tethered or committed to anything. How do you describe this collapse?
I mean, I think that the collapse happens, partially because people, when you can't give reasons for why you do things, you don't have a reason to keep doing them. And so it's easier to stop just practicing. Mm-hmm. If you can't say,
it's way more convenient to not keep Shabbos.
It's way more convenient. It's way more convenient not to have to go shul. It's way more inconvenient not to say, like,
not have any obligations.
I'm a priori not going to date certain people for all of these things kind of fall away when you can't give reasons for them, and then that has
the community fell away first, maybe, and I don't know, or which order you think it happened.
You can argue where suburbanization is cause and effect here is because basically, like, you move away from a place where you can walk. And so now you have to drive. And, I grew up in a place where people, like, scheduled play dates for their, I never had a spontaneous moment in my life. That's one of the
crazy, right?
It's one of the things that's like
totally
most like a chavaya metakenet, like a correcting experience when I go to Lakewood, which is just seeing people like running all over the place in the house.
Kids
everywhere. Even in my house, we don't even have any little kids.
Same.
Like,
I live in Teaneck.
Kids run in. They're like, "Who is kid that?" I don't know.
Whose kid is this?
Literally.
Sometimes you'll hear an adult, like, in the middle of a Shabbos meal, it's the afternoon before. Whose kid is this? Like, we don't know where they came from.
And, like, they'd call, like, the FBI would be like,
exactly.
Where I grew up,
like, we have a missing child.
Exactly.
Like, Exactly. It's a different thing.
Very different.
So here's my real question. I want to hear this from both of you because this moment I have been struggling because I don't think the Orthodox community has the language to explain what it has learned to a non-Orthodox community, because the language we use is language that is founded right away in commandedness, and we have our Maramakomo sheets, our source sheets. Yeah. Let me explain to you why you should keep each detail of Shabbos. Right. And they're very, I would call it ideological, but very halachic.
Yes.
Which you need to be even if you don't believe in it. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no.
You do believe in it because you believe in it of itself. Like, you don't have to.
You believe in it as a normative structure, whether,
I always tell Josh, like, if you, going back to the jeans, like, if you try on a pair of jeans and it fits well and it looks good, then are the jeans true? Like, why do we ask that question? Do you know what I mean? I don't think that, like, when someone says, like, I live a halachic life, I think that the question itself of, like, believing in it, no, you believe in it because it actually,
it fits.
It's
makes
the community and the life that you want, and therefore it's true. I don't understand the secondary trueness that I think the religious community focuses
too much on.
Way too much on. Obsesses over
much.
and makes people feel like they have to believe
is that sometimes the only way to preserve it? But I know it's not, because I know so many people who they can't really articulate the truth of their religious practice, but it's so much a part of their identity.
True.
That's what I think is bringing back,
right.
And this gets back to something you mentioned, and I think the contrast between you two is bringing back a familially anchored Judaism, a Judaism that is mimetic, organic.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the Chaim Soloveitchik
essay, who we former 1840 guest. Right. I have to say, of course.
I mean, it's amazing, and I think about it all the time because the smidge of Yiddishkeit that I grew up with was because it was mimetic.
That's what stuck.
That's what stuck. And that's why
And in our communities in the non-Orthodox world, that mimetic tradition it's frayed quite a bit. I mean, some people have it to a degree, but you have to close yourself off to build a family culture. You need some insulation. You need the walls of a home. So my question to both of you is, I fully agree with this, like, I don't want to call it an end, but a reimagining. This cannot, I hope it doesn't continue. Just kind of the wandering, aimless wandering of American Jewry,
Like lox and bagels.
Yeah, like we need to be anchored in something that provides more, or it's not going to last. Now, I'm also not a triumphalist. I don't like when the Orthodox Union is like, well, we won. We didn't win because we're one people, and we have a massive constituency who are not involved, are not educated, and they're not moving to Lakewood, blah, blah, blah. You know, like they're
100%.
they're not moving to Lakewood.
There are a lot of people moving.
but
They're not moving.
I know. I'm just kidding.
But what do you think is the way to reawaken American Jews to a new vision of what Jewish life could be? Like, in a way, I look at you, and I don't want to freak you out. This conversation is a part of our annual 1840 Teshuvah series.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Because I do look at your story in its deepest sense as an act of Teshuvah, of return. It might not be the Teshuvah of...
We
true.
think that way. I
We
think
think
we
we
think
talk
about
about
that
it.
too.
That, in
you
those
might not
terms.
self-identify as Balei Tshuva. You might not identify as Orthodox Jews.
But I definitely identify as a return.
But there is a
100%.
return.
There has been a return,
to
for sure.
Yiddishkeit as home.
Yeah.
Yiddishkeit as
Absolutely.
this is who I am, and this is a part of my identity, and I can't extricate my sense of self from the tradition and the universe from which I emerge and fashion me. So I'm curious for you, what are your ideas? What could reawaken people that would allow them? You know this world better than I do. I know them also.
Right.
And like, it pains me that I know on social media, because I've been more vocal on Israel. I'm not like I've been much more vocal than I've ever been. I've noticed a few friends, people who I treasure. Sophie, if you're listening, I miss you. Who I treasure, who like unfollowed me, who don't like it breaks my heart, because I feel a deep sense of responsibility because of my ability to cross over some of these boundaries to the non-Orthodox community.
Right.
Deep sense of kinship, responsibility, friendship. I'm not trying to do kirv on anybody, but I want people to find their Jewish life satisfying and enriching and meaningful and purposeful. How do you think, what do we need to rebuild? What's the shift that we need to really have a rich Jewish future, which is the second half of your subtitle, The Future of Jewish Life?
It's a big question.
Sure it is.
I mean, I think one of the goals with the book was to even though it was written before October 7th, it was written from a moment of this sense that something was ending, that the ability of the consensus of that based on those pillars of this kind of 20th century Jewishness was just not going to continue to be viable. And so one of the goals of the book was simply to try to say to American Jews, it might be time to start thinking intentionally about what you're doing. Like hold yourself accountable to give reasons for why you do them. Don't just brush off being Jewish as another kind of unself-conscious thing that you do because
you're figure out what it's going to mean for you,
exactly,
and those
do
around
it.
you.
And the people, and do it. And this is one of the other things that the book kind of took aim at was, I think that American Jews, in order, again, to forego asking the big questions, basically said, I'm Jewish, and I'm not going to define what that means. And also, being Jewish doesn't require anything from me. So in that moment, Judaism becomes just a matter of self-ascription. And one of the things that I think becomes so clear when you look at, the Frum community is Jewish is something that you do. What you ascribe to yourself is not like the important thing. And so if there could be like more attention to doing rather than a script,
Yeah.
I think that would be a really, really good start.
The non-Orthodox world quite well. You work,
Yeah.
and most of the people who you're working with who are Jewish were, I assume, not Orthodox.
Correct.
Do you think it is realistic? Because I can't be the one to say it, because they'll assume that I'm trying to recruit for Orthodoxy. I assure you I am not. How do you think we should be making the case for tradition without falling prey to the instinctive dismissal of, I don't want to become Orthodox. I don't want to, how do you avoid that? How do you create, because you kind of occupy this space, we said it before, kind of what I call Orthodox adjacent. you don't assign on to some NFL contract. Oh, I'm now officially Orthodox, but
Yeah,
you
the shul
But we live in like an obligated life. And
an obligated Jewish life.
Yes.
How do you think? What mistakes do you think are made in the way people make the case for such a life, and how do you think we're going to make the case for this? Like, who's going to do it?
It's hard.
It's
a
a
very
hard
question.
question.
I mean, I think it's very hard. We go to my house in Lakewood for Shabbos all the time, and I think about this question all the time. You know, I'm sitting on like a nice Shabbos afternoon, and
it's great.
It's amazing, and there's like 30 adorable kids like playing in our front yard, even though we don't even have any little kids in my family anymore, and it's like so nice. And I think to myself, how can you recreate this without it being as insular and as sort of like, you know, only going to attract a very, like you're saying, a very certain group of people. And the question is like, how can you create this in a much more open way? And can it exist that way?
Correct.
Or does it only exist?
Is there a sustainable Orthodox adjacent, you know, maybe you call it like very left-wing modern Orthodox or what?
Yeah,
But
that's
it's-
sometimes how we
that
that
identify.
can
Open
reach
Orthodox?
beyond its
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
Can reach beyond us.
I mean, it's funny that we're using the word Orthodox because one of the points I end up towards the end of the book, I write about how, and this is specifically in relationship to American Jews and the way they think about America, and something that Christian neo-Orthodox thinkers of the 20th century, like the Niebuhr brothers, for example, they understood that there has to be some distinction between the values of the state that they're living in and the values that make the values for their Christian terminology of the beloved community. And the kind of shocking thing, I mean, maybe is that in English, at least, like there's basically no writing about this problem from a Jewish perspective. I mean, from a non-Orthodox perspective, there's Musar literature about it, and like that's interesting. And I draw on that, you know, like Rav Hutner's quoted in the intro to the book, and like that's part of, and that's part of the resource. Those are part of the resource that I think we can draw on. But there really hasn't been, I would say, post like 1970 for a really critical look on the part of non-Orthodox American Jews at the ways that it may be necessary to hold America at a distance in order to
foster some independent identity.
Exactly.
And also the opposite, though, which is like I think and this is how sometimes
and this is the dialectic
the
that we
dialectical,
play.
exactly, because I think like the Orthodox community, even though I don't, like I said, obviously we're not talking about people that are going to become Orthodox, and so I don't think the Orthodox community needs to like sort of pitch themselves to them. However, by sort of declaring itself as like the only normatively committed Jewish community, and also very simultaneously very often advocating for sort of positions on things that are actually kind of not central to Judaism at all.
Correct.
As like the most important things, then they sort of make, I think, a lot of other Jews feel
it's like an
immediately
unforced
repelled.
error.
Right. You can think, one way to think about it.
Yeah. I just want to give an example for a second. Like think about a lot of gender issues or tznius issues or things that are really not central to Judaism. I'm sorry, but just halachically speaking, anyways, like they're not.
No, I'm
like
with you. There is some corrective happening now that, like, you know, there are books that have recently come out on modesty, tznius for the Orthodox community. That's like, we can't continue with this being like the ball
Shabbos,
and chain.
basically.
Yeah.
Like, why isn't Shabbos? But like, ironically, I think in a lot of, and what I'm about to say now, I don't know if I can say, but like, I think there's a lot of Jewish communities where somebody like secretly turning their light on in their bedroom on Shabbos is more acceptable than like a woman wearing jeans. Like, that's for sure true. That's certainly true in like Lakewood, you know what I mean? Like, even though that would also be terrible, I'm not saying that they accept such a thing, but it's definitely a reversal of like what I think.
There are certain things that we've centered that maybe it works for our community, but are needless barriers for traditional Jewish life or what others see as traditional Jewish life, reaching beyond the born and bred Orthodox community.
And that's why Masorati Jews in Israel, I think, are a really good model of like what
Correct
could be
outside
of the Orthodox
My
community.
puppy's Yiddishkeit.
Exactly, and it's the one that we all, if we had, you know, grandparents who lived the course of the American Jewish century in the book had, you know, certainly my Bubby like grew up in a frum house, but was not herself frum, but had, you know, she was a Yiddish speaking, you know, person and had access to it. And my dad absorbed that and passed that down, but it becomes a little bit more attenuated each generation. But what Shaindy was saying, Shaindy said something that, you know, made me think about one of the ways we frame this phenomenon that she's describing, which is that something that happened between the Orthodox and the non-Orthodox worlds is that they both agreed that obligation and inclusion are mutually exclusive.
I'm so with you on this.
So
they each picked half.
Exactly.
They each picked half. And
I think it was a massive mistake.
And it's a big mistake. Because
more or less.
There's no reason why you can't be fully inclusive and also obligated. You're obligated in a different way. You know, there'll be halachic arguments for sure, but that might be okay. If
the Orthodox community, I've mentioned this before, specifically with gay issues, like their ability to, I think by and large, I take a very different approach to this stuff, but like, they're gay Jews. Like, it didn't have to become the red alert, they're taking over.
Exactly.
And by the way, I think that's a Christian influence on Judaism, 100%. Like in America, like not because I'm saying that I'm not going to get into a halachic argument against gay people, but the idea that it became so centered. Since when? I mean,
think
my mother
it has
told
to,
me.
it has to do with the family structure, I think. I think because we're so centered on family.
My mother told me that when she was a little girl, growing up in Washington Heights, my mother grew up in a Yeki community. There was a guy in their shul that everybody, she said that, you know, this is a time before anyone used the word gay, but he wasn't married and everybody knew that he lived with another man. And like, of course he's welcome in shul. What is that? You know what I mean? Just like other people were welcome in shul who also didn't do other things.
We sometimes get too reactive and we center values that might work deeply. I'm not telling Lakewood to change. I'm not talking
about like telling Lakewood, I'm talking about the Jews that right now don't feel included in traditional Jewish life.
To imagine Jewish tradition as something that's not just possible, but it's enriching. It's so doable. I tell my students this. It's in a way it's a lot easier than you think, and when you're able to make it fit and you're aligned to it, then you're willing to really commit and sacrifice to it for the long run. It's because I think people have very cumbersome views of what Jewish life actually entails that they're like, I'll never be able to actually integrate this into my life.
Yeah, and once you start, it becomes much easier, and then you find yourself.
And also, none of us are perfect Jews, and so like the fact that there are certain violations that can make people feel completely unable to join the Jewish community, and other violations that to me has nothing to do with Judaism. It's just our culture, which is obviously there are cultural wars happening, but Judaism doesn't have to be on one side of those cultural wars.
I fully agree with you, and for the vision and the way that you use language to articulate the story in your incredible book, again, called Tablet Shatter, The End of an American Jewish Century and the Future of Jewish Life. But even more so, I'm so glad that we did this conversation together.
Me too.
Because your story is emblematic in many ways of what so many people are grappling with. Whether you call it hashkafically homeless, I'm sure there are a lot of Lakewood people who are listening to this, and they have their own struggles with some of these things. And the non-Orthodox community, the mono-Orthodox community, there is this moment, people are awakening and they want to figure out what's the long-term vision for Yiddishkeit? How do we create something that is sustainable, enriching, meaningful, real, authentic? And you're really grappling with that. And more importantly, you're living it. So...
We're
trying.
Doing our best.
I said it. So I don't know if you're the new model. I'm just curious for both of you. If I were to tell you, when I first said that this is part of our Tshuva series, if I were to tell you that, like, I think in some ways this is the new vision of what Jewish outreach should look like, what do you think about that?
Halavai, I think we sometimes feel very lonely. So
I would like
join
more
us.
people to join us in you know,
like struggling
together within a normative framework, and bristling with it and getting angry at it sometimes.
I'm ready to link arms and really
Amazing.
Make this happen. I can't thank you enough for your time. We've been speaking for a while. I always end my interviews with more rapid fire questions.
Okay.
You'll each answer. My first question, I would love a book recommendation from each of you, a book specifically that is targeted to maybe like your younger selves or your fellow, you know, whether it's non-Orthodox or more progressive Jews who feel this sense of alienation and that restored your faith in what Judaism can provide. Is there a book that restored your faith in what Judaism can provide?
Wow. I have a really funny recommendation, but it's not even a book.
You go first.
We just were really enjoying it, and I don't know why it's in my head now, but the Rav Samsal Hirsch's Pesach Haggadah is all about Rav Samsal, my mother's a Yeki.
Rav Samsal Hirsch, sure.
Has a Pesach Haggadah with his commentary, and the commentary engages a lot with these issues, a lot about obligation as itself true. And he has these really powerful, and I think kind of surprising that it doesn't get more controversy, but I know there are some about him that are just beyond, because they wrote it when they wrote it. Then
he's had his fair amount of controversy.
He did, but today he's not a controversial.
No,
I don't know, maybe not in my Yekish house.
We'll talk after, yeah.
But I'm just meaning to say, but he has a lot of lines that I think really goes to exactly this, about the truth being true because your father taught it to, a father teaches it to his son,
Yeah.
and about
Right, like-
obligation being liberating, and it's all about Pesach, obviously.
Yes.
And I think it really made us feel a little bit less,
That was a-
specifically less homeless.
Yeah, we decided we're Hersheyans, even if there are
Sure.
aren't people who identify that way.
Sure.
on
Yeah,
the street
it was-
like that.
not?
It really spoke to me.
Why
in
not?
terms
Yeah,
of-
just don't start davening in broyers. I think you'll be a little disappointed. Or you
Today, my mother is still like
Whatever.
Shaindy's mom grew up in the
Oh,
bars.
whatever,
community,
whatever
so-
works. Are you going to go with that book too? Do you have another book recommendation?
No, this is a really hard question. I mean, part of why I wrote the book was that I didn't, popular Jewish writing kind of falls either under like the self-help category, or is very scholarly, and so I don't know if there was one book that kind of restored my hope in the future. And I think the book is a little bit. The book tries to be hopeful, but the ending notes are a little bit cautious. I mean, there is a thinker who is not Jewish, actually, but who has been very influential, I think, for people who are concerned about the fate of community and certainly
And who's
religious
that?
communities, Alistair McIntyre.
Okay.
And
There's specific.
I read After Virtue
Okay.
when I was in college, and it repelled me initially because at the time I was very like a self-understood Marxist. And I read it,
God
which
bless
is
you,
what
Josh.
happens when you're,
I appreciate the qualification of self-understood.
yeah, self-understood and Princeton.
Yeah,
of
at
course.
Princeton.
Yeah. From North Jersey.
Yeah, from North Jersey,
Yeah,
exactly.
Two parents who are doctors.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Those are
And
the only type.
Yeah.
which are exactly.
The only Marxists that we still have are the self-understood
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that book, I felt that book was a challenge, and I still think it's a challenge. But Alistair McIntyre, I read it again as I was writing the book, and the way that McIntyre thinks about tradition, I think, is one that traditional Judaism does intuitively. Like McIntyre is writing that it's something that Western civilization has forgot how to do, to live within the argument of something that's passed down and binding and normatively and understood as normative. And his argument is that the West lost it's lost its language through the Enlightenment of being able to talk about basically being able to talk about the virtues. Now, of course, Judaism has a virtue language and never lost it in that way.
Correct.
And
So it woke you up to that.
exactly to this idea that actually we have the language in
Our tradition.
but it has to be translated now.
Exactly.
Into
It's all about
a vernacular
translation.
that people understand.
My next question is, somebody gave you a great deal of money and allowed you to take a sabbatical with no responsibilities whatsoever and go back to school and get a PhD, in your case, a different PhD than the one that you, God willing, will finish at some point. I know what it's like to almost be finished with a PhD. That's a long period of time. But to go back to school, study any field of your choice, what do you think you'd study and write about?
I have a very cliche answer, but I wouldn't get a PhD, and I would use that money to try and end the occupation.
Oh, gosh. Shaindy,
I'm
she's
sorry.
She's the
killing
most
me here.
misogynistic
I'm
person,
sorry.
so there's no way you're gonna
Okay.
get it.
Forget that.
There's no way she's gonna keep the money. There was no way.
There's no way. That's like what
Okay.
I've been witness. I think I also want to say, because it's important for me that I'm on this program, to say that I spent many of the last years really witnessing people, as opposed to just feelings, and those feelings are important, and we're talking about them, and I don't think they're not important, that we as Jews have, really witnessing the lives of so many people just being destroyed over and over again. And it's important for me to say that I think, especially
100%.
in light of what we're experiencing as the anti-Semitism we're experiencing, it's easy to get caught up in our own experience of it and forget that on the ground there are so many people who are suffering so much, and that is really my primary commitment.
I feel identical to that, but
Please
He's
give me a
getting a
normal
PhD.
answer.
but I'll give you. But
For God's sake.
I'll give you two. I have two. This will give you a sense of the two directions in which
Yeah.
I'm drawing. What I would do with the money. Either I'd actually go learn yeshiva properly and develop.
You would
my-
definitely go learn
yeah,
yeshiva. You're
almost
dying to
definitely.
do that.
Do you know what you want to learn? Is there an area of Torah study that you feel like is calling upon you?
I think honestly, just even like real serious halacha.
Yeah.
Not like fuzzy
Gemara, Tur, Shulchan Aruch,
exactly,
like
like
the
really,
whole thing.
exactly, like to
really go through it. It's
to
awesome.
really go
It's
through
fast.
it.
It's
Just 'cause
absolutely
it's something
fascinating.
that like.
In the meantime, I would recommend learning Aruch HaShulchan. You get that flavor.
Yeah.
Just go
I'll tell.
Keseder in the Aruch HaShulchan. My final question, I'm always curious about people's sleep schedules. What time do you go to sleep at night, and what time do you wake up in the morning?
I mean, we have very different.
We have
schedules.
different inclinations.
Like
on
my
this one.
inclination is to go to bed at like 3 and get up at like if I can, get up at like 9. And his inclination.
We're talking, yeah,
Yeah.
that's my language. And I can see 9 is a euphemism for 10:30.
And
Yeah. Well, I said if I can.
9
Depends
is
my
like
work
in your head.
schedule.
You sleep at 3, then you're like, I'll get up
Yeah,
at 9. It's
100%,
6 hours I can do it,
100%.
and then it's like 10:30.
But Josh is like, I'll go to bed at 10:30.
My fantasy is like I go to bed at 10:30. I wake up at 6:30. I go for a run. You know,
And like get your morning, like get the routine.
Exactly.
This is like the part of I can least relate to or understand.
Yeah,
But I also
it's
have, like,
my most like elite
I'm one
coded
of
kind of like.
Yeah.
I'm one of 13 kids, and I just don't think you grow up in a house like that and go to bed early. Josh
It's-
always,
it's
and my house
impossible.
at 4 a.m. It's during
bustling.
the day. It's
It's
completely.
bustling.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
completely
people are, like,
bustling.
eating-
People are going to buy like schnitzel
You're
sandwiches.
schmoozing. You're taking out like the leftovers.
100%.
Exactly.
Josh and Shaindy, thank you
you.
so much for speaking with me today.
Thank
Thank you
so much.
so much. This has been a really fun,
Yeah,
really fun
it's been a
conversation.
blast. Thank you so much.
Awesome.